Does Elden Ring deserve its nomination? Oh, this is good. Oh, let's watch this. Elden Ring deserve its nomination for Game of the Year. Here we go.
Hello and welcome, this is Redditosker, and today I want to talk about a little Elden Ring controversy that has cropped up. You see, Elden Ring has been nominated for Game of the Year.
Yes.
In fact, it's not just Game of the Year, Elden Ring has been nominated for several awards in different categories.
Game of all
And one of
games.
those categories happens to be Best Narrative. And that's why this minor controversy has arisen.
Okay.
There's a lot of people that feel that Elden Ring doesn't deserve to win Best Narrative. That in fact,
Apparently they haven't watched any of the YouTube videos explaining the narrative.
it doesn't even deserve to be nominated.
Yes.
Let me give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. The following is from video game journalists, which I only mention because it shows that this isn't a random viewpoint, it's a common opinion among certain circles with institutional authority.
Keep in mind that I think the institutional authority of video game journalism pretty much went down the drain about 10 years ago, okay? Like, there are video game journalists that have integrity and that people take very seriously, but I don't think that somebody is like, oh, video game journalist, that means him no good video games.
The Game Awards nominations are so bizarre this year. Saifu for Fighting Game, Neon White for Debut Indie, Elden Ring for Narrative. Was everybody asleep?
Elden Ring for Best Narrative is truly a farce LMAO.
And finally they go on to this one.
Lore is great. Do more lore. Just don't subsist on a diet of lore when it comes to narrative. Narrative is everything that's used to tell stories, and I find a narrative that just uses mountains of lore boring. Sorry. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Okay.
Isn't, like, narrative and lore, is she saying that she wants, like, more cinematics? Because I feel like, yeah, it's like the world building of it. I'm trying to understand what she means by that, but we'll see. We'll go through this. More character development? Yeah, okay, here we go.
Now my peers in Elden Ring nerdship have already responded to these complaints. Lore Hunter, Ziostorm, and Zuli the Witch have all made their own videos trying to explain how Elden Ring delivers its narrative. And the things that they say are basically what you would expect.
Yes.
There is a story, it's told through environmental storytelling and item descriptions. The games are purposely ambiguous, you're supposed to go out and share your ideas with other players and try and come up with a community conclusion. And all of those things are true, they're very true. But in the spirit of being fair to the people that don't like Elden Ring's story, I'm going to assume that they already know all that. And that what
It's very frustrating to see people say, like, you just don't understand the story. Like, no, I get it. It's clear. I just don't like the stories that go heavy on proper nouns created for insular world building or super interested. That go heavy on proper nouns created for insular world building. Wait, what? Are super interesting. Is this English? Or am I reading it wrong? I just don't think stories that go heavy on proper nouns created for insular world building are super... Okay, yes, I get it now. So yeah, he thinks it, like, the proper nouns, and so I don't know. I feel like this is, like, the stories that go heavy on proper nouns created for insular world building. I mean, like, I think this could apply to, like, Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings too. I think that, like, what this guy is kind of saying is that what he really cares about more is he cares about, like, personalities and the actions of those different personalities and stories rather than the structure of the story itself. I think that's kind of what he's trying to say. Like,
they're really talking about when they're criticizing...
relatability. Which is, like, that's fine. I think that if somebody doesn't like the lore of Dark Souls or Elden Ring and the way that it's told, I think that's totally fine. By the way, I don't think that's a wrong opinion to not like the lore of the game, But to say that the lore is bad, or to say that the game doesn't have lore or narrative, I think that is stupid. That is wrong. But to not like it, or not like the way that it's the way that it's given to you, I don't think that's bad to say at all. It's completely okay.
Elden Ring's story is the plot. And if that's the case, then I think I see where they're coming from. And so for a moment, let me try and explain what I think is the general objection to the plots of Elden Ring and Souls games.
Okay.
If you ask 5 lore nerds what the plot of Elden Ring is, it's possible that you'll get 5 different answers.
Yes.
If you ask them what the point of the game is, you might get 5 more. And at least one of them might say that it doesn't matter what the actual point is or what the actual plot is, that the real point is interpreting the story and that's the only point, which reflects badly on the fans if that's the attitude they're going to take. Because saying that the game is nothing but interpretation is just another way of saying that there's no real meaning. It lends credence to the idea, this very long-standing criticism that Souls games have had, that the story is nothing but glorified fanfiction.
I think that whenever you're able to put things together and somebody who can tell the story themselves, I disagree that that is a fundamentally bad thing. And if somebody reads a story and each person gets something different out of it, I feel like that's not a bad thing. I think that that actually is very interesting. Because most of the time whenever you read something and then you just like, oh, well, this is what it's about, this is what I got out of it. Like, it reminds me a lot of, like, a weird way of explaining it. It reminds me a lot of, like, how people look at religious texts, right? It's like people read the Bible and, like, some people get one thing out of it and some people get something completely different out of it. So I think that, yeah, it's the same as, like, art. Like, there's a lot of people that look at some art and they like it for this reason. Other people look at it for other reasons. So I don't think this makes it bad. It's intentional,
That's the general objection number 1. I don't agree with it, but I'm not going to spend this video talking about it very much. I've already made a video on that topic before, and those objections are also addressed by the recent videos of Lore Hunter.
You know, I think I'm actually thinking about this more, as I was thinking of, like, other things that I've like movies or, like, narratives I've seen that have, like, a very unclear, like, point to them. I think that Fight Club is a relatively good example of this, is that there are some very overt themes of Fight Club, but there are also very subversive themes of Fight Club, that if you watch Fight Club, every single person that watches Fight Club is not going to get the same thing out of it. Because, number one, the ending, at least in the movie, is extremely ambiguous. You don't really know what happens after that, and I think that's part of what makes it interesting. And I don't think that makes the narrative of Fight Club bad. I think that it makes it good because it allows the person to see actions that exist in a world and then put their own intent and their own expectations on top of them. Fight Club is just misinterpreted. Well, what I'm saying is that everybody misinterprets it in a different way, and that's a good thing.
Zuli the Witch and Ziostorm. Specifically, Lore Hunters I liked the most, if you wanted my opinion. The second objection, which I find more interesting, and which is explicitly said in the tweets that I showed you, is that Elden Ring delivers the bulk of its narrative through the lore, and that delivering the bulk of that narrative through lore is not an example of good storytelling, that it's boring, and it doesn't deserve the nomination it received. This argument is interesting because they cede ground here. They admit that Elden Ring does have a narrative, and she even says that narrative is everything that's used to tell the story, which I actually think is absolutely correct, and something that not everyone understands.
Lore.
But where I think she's wrong, where I think they're wrong, is that lore isn't the only way Souls games tell their story, and it might not even be the most important or primary way in which the story gets told.
No, it's not.
One of the reasons I love Souls games is because in Souls games the gameplay is the story. Souls games do a good job of connecting its very different aspects, like lore, exploration, and combat, in such a way that each is improved by the presence of the other.
Yeah,
One of the clearest ways they do this is in how story elements are revealed or emphasized through boss battles. Let me give you an example.
I think Radahn is probably the best example I could think of, because like the story impact of killing Radon has a clear indication, a clear indicated effect on the world. You know, you have like that giant fucking hole in the ground and the stars are falling, etc. Narration does not require a narrator. No, it doesn't. I think that really there's also a lot of like spontaneous storytelling and spontaneous interaction and lore that happens in the game. Like, for example, if you talk to an NPC after you've completed some other task, and this can only happen if you've talked to them and you've done that task, or you walk by an NPC at a certain time, or you do something at night or something like this. And like, in a weird way, I actually think that some of the storytelling in like Elden Ring and Souls games is almost a little bit like Overwatch. And I know this might sound kind of odd, but the way that you learn a lot of the lore in Overwatch is by playing the different characters and seeing the interactions between the characters. And that type of spontaneous, impulsive storytelling, I think, is actually very compelling. And I like that. I don't think that means that it's bad. It's just the story being told in a different way. Most diverse gameplay.
In Bloodborne's main game, you hear about Ludwig, first hunter of the Healing Church, fairly early on. There's not much information given to you, but what little you do have suggests he was a holy warrior, descended from a line that valued honor and chivalry. In the DLC, you finally get to meet him, and he has transformed into the most hideous of beasts.
Same with Lawrence.
His body is asymmetrical chaos. His lower body consists of several thin legs, ending in hooves or talons, with at least one of them flailing uselessly in the air. His upper body has 2 elongated arms, one of which he uses to support his misshapen body. Between his arms, above his horse head, protrudes a gaping circular mouth, which enfolds a cluster of eyes. In combat, Ludwig shambles. He lunges. He charges relentlessly.
He goes up in the fucking air and you can't see him, then he comes down and your health bar's gone. Fuck that mechanic.
The boss fight is a nightmare filled with screams. He is an unspeakable, horrifying beast. What was once the leader of the church hunters has become completely degraded, becoming the worst example of what he was supposed to eradicate. And then, the second phase happens.
I actually think this cinematic is one of the greatest cinematics of all fucking time. Because you don't even really see the humanity in his face until you get to the second phase. It is so good. It actually, like, this is very rare. It actually creeped me out the first time I saw it. I was like, whoa. What the fuck? Yeah, it's so good. My guiding moonlight. Yeah, you were with me all along.
At his lowest point, Ludwig finds his guiding moonlight and reclaims a piece of his nobility. He grips the holy moonlight sword in both hands, and then combat begins again.
It's so much easier than the first phase, let's be honest.
Now, however, his posture has changed. He stands upright. His screeching has been replaced with the grunts of a human. He wields his weapon with skill and deliberate intent. It viscerally contrasts what this boss fight was like even moments before. Even his boss name changes from Ludwig the Accursed to Ludwig the Holy Blade. It's an absolutely exhilarating moment. The music in the second phase is some of the best in any Souls game, perfectly complementing Ludwig's new moveset. One of the reasons the music works so well is because the shift happens during the second phase transitional cutscene. The game seems to be trying to get the opening to play during Ludwig's monologue, and the crescendo right after the player gets control of the character. Which I have to admit, still gets me very excited, even though I've seen that cutscene at least a dozen times.
It's so good.
This isn't something that From Software just does in boss fights.
And they also did this with Lawrence, too. I feel like Lawrence was a really important boss in the game. And yeah, like they also have the Lady Maria with the clock tower. It's just like the lore of her is really good, especially in like the context of, you know, the doll being made off of her, like out of her like image. And then also, like, you know, trying to hide the fishing hamlet that they did the experience or the experiments on. I think that it was very, very cool. But in terms of an actual boss fight and how a boss fight tells the story, yes, Ludwig is probably... Mikolash is up there. Maybe you could look at the Moon Beast, the last boss, the secret like third umbilical cord is like where that Mikolash really? Yeah, I think Mikolash tells the story. I mean, like I think absolutely because he's literally talking and explaining it. Like how they hid the thing with the vacuous ROM and all of that. Yeah, absolutely. And then, the Koss, or do they call it Kossum? Yeah, I feel like absolutely the Mikolash fight is up there. 100% Moon Presence. Yeah, there you go. Ocelot. Yeah, it's just that I think the difference is that with Osirios, there's not really a lot of context for that affects the rest of the game. Whereas, like, Mikolash is actually, like, a very foundational element of the Bloodborne world. And, like, what happened with him affected a lot of other things in the game that you interact with. It's just that you don't really see it directly.
They do it all the time. In Bloodborne, you can be killed by a special enemy and get kidnapped.
Oh,
when you wake, you'll find yourself in a jail.
yes.
There is no lantern around to transport you back to the hunter's dream.
It's fucking
And dying
annoying.
in this area won't take you to a lantern, it will simply put you back in the jail.
I was so upset whenever this
The
happened.
area that you're in is large and ominous. Cryptic notes lie in the ground to enhance the feeling that you are somewhere that you should not be.
Yeah.
And most disquieting of all is that you hear the sound of chanting. That's really the worst part, because Bloodborne generally has no music in the normal environment. In fact, Souls games generally have no music in the normal environments. Music is usually reserved for boss battles or hub areas,
Yeah.
which makes this chanting particularly unnerving. What is it? What's it supposed to be? Was it cultists performing in a ritual? Were we in a giant boss room and just didn't know it yet? Were they calling out to the Great Ones, and was the second voice the Great One's answer? That moment was great. You were supposed to feel out of place and unnerved.
I think the other example of that in From Software games is obviously Ash Lake in Dark Souls 1. Ash Lake is one of the only places that actually has any sort of soundtrack to it. And whenever you're there, it's like, oh fuck. Right? Like you're on the pillars of the world. And I've obviously watched a number of I have watched so many fucking videos about this lore stuff, as you guys can probably tell with the way that I talk about it. Like, I know a lot about it. I don't know as much as the guys that make the videos, but I've spent a lot of time reading it and looking into it. And I feel like, yeah, whenever you get there, it certainly has a specific vibe. It's also another great example of the chanting is before you get to Radahn. Remember that? Whenever you're getting up there, dude, I remember whenever I did that the first time, that was so fucking badass, man. Yeah.
Supposed to be trembling in awe, trepidation, and curiosity. They nailed the atmosphere. And part of the reason it was so good was because it was supported by the gameplay.
Yeah.
The area is trying to be oppressive and inhospitable.
It is.
To feel like you really shouldn't be there.
You shouldn't.
To reflect this, the enemies in the area are unusually hard.
Yes.
It's possible to end up in the Hypogean jail at a very early level.
I did.
Which means many people will lose most of their HP every hit.
Yes.
That's if they don't die outright. And you can't just leave, you have to explore. Dying returns you to the jail area, which means you're trapped in this place until you can navigate your way out. The situation creates an atmosphere. And that atmosphere is a story.
I would look at it like this is one of the things is like Curse in Dark Souls 1 is a shit mechanic and they got rid of it. However, I got nostalgia because I was thinking about it and I went back and I watched back whenever I got cursed, and this is probably whenever a lot of people would get cursed in Dark Souls 1, going to the Gaping Dragon. You know, whenever you're in the depths and the sewers. And I remember trying to fight the Gaping Dragon with a broken weapon while I was cursed, and then having to go all the way back up to the top to talk to the guy right after at the bell tower after the gargoyles to have the curse removed. And I do remember that. To be fair, I mean, there are a lot of other things about it I remember too, but I do remember that very fucking clearly. And there is something to be said for it.
My favorite example of what I'm trying to convey to you is the final boss of Dark Souls 3, the Soul of Cinder. You go in, and he seems to be just a regular knight enemy. But throughout the fight, you notice that he moves in a way that's reminiscent to how players move.
Yep.
As the battle drags on, he starts shifting form. He starts changing builds. He'll become a Dex Pyromancer with a curved sword, or he'll shift into a lance-wielding paladin, or a pure mage casting high-level spells.
Yeah, it's the worst one.
And sometimes he'll mix and match things. He'll shift to a Pyromancer, use power within on himself, and then switch to the mage to take advantage of the damage buff while in a different form. Or he'll cast Homing Crystal Soul Mass on himself, then shift to the lance build to get into melee range while still putting pressure on you with the Homing Soul Masses. If you're fortunate...
I feel like this boss is actually real, like, it's super undertuned in Dark Souls 3, but, like, in a lot of the mods for Dark Souls, they, like, tune this boss up really high. He's hard.
Just
it's
from
just that
fighting
whenever
this
you
thing,
get to him, you're over
you'll
leveled.
realize what it is. You'll realize what it's supposed to be. It's you.
Mm-hmm.
It's everybody. It's you in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls
Yep.
2 when you chose to link the fire. It's everyone
I don't know about
that
Dark
has
Souls 2.
ever chosen to link the fire. And when you finally beat him, you get his HP down to 0. He form shifts one more time. The music also changes in the background. Mixed into the song, you now hear...
The Gwyn, yeah.
And with that sound, you know you face the first iteration of the fire linking cycle. Gwyn, the First Lord, with a moveset that brings to mind his original form. You realize that you're fighting a deific manifestation of all that came before. For me, this was a truly emotional moment.
And I think that for a lot of people are like, wait, what? I thought he was on fire, so I got his ass. Yeah, that shit was easy. I beat him in like 5 tries. Beat the whole fucking game. How about that? You know, that's really what people would think. But I do think that there's a reason why these Dark Souls lore videos are so popular. It's because the lore, it blue balls you enough to where people go out of their way to seek more of it.
I got it the first time I went in there. I knew what I was facing, and it hit me in my heart. I get emotional just talking about it now. I think I lost a few times just from how much it affected me. The point I'm making
I lost
is
because I
that
was trying to
in
die
these
for
situations, information is being transmitted to the player.
Yeah.
The bestial madness of Ludwig's first face and the quiet nobility of the second are both partially conveyed through Ludwig's body language. Just the way he moves conveys story-enhancing information. In fact, it's the main way that information is transmitted at all in these games. The story and the gameplay are interconnected. They enhance one another, and together create this one moment.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of those. And like, of course, you have things like Artorias, you know, with like the way he holds his sword and the fact that he's like left-handed, etc. Let's see, other fights that the gameplay affects, like obviously Osiros, whenever he's like holding the fucking, the invisible thing. And like, let's see, besides that, fuck. Let me think. Sif? Yeah, Sif. Holding the sword, definitely. Painted World. Sister Freed. Nah, I don't really think so. I don't think that's a good example. Still killing the Abyss creatures? Yeah, still killing the Abyss creatures. That's a good idea. Radagon? Yeah, I think Radagon's a good example of it for sure. Nameless King? Yeah, I think the Nameless King is a good example, too. Gale? Yeah, I think Gale's a good example. Pinwheel. I think Pinwheel's probably a better example. But yeah, just in general. Now we're just naming bosses. No, what I'm saying is like, so for example, with like Gale, the way he moves is like, it's very animalistic. And then in phase 2, it's like much more, human, right? He's doing a lot of different crazy things. And so it's much more into like his lore versus like with, like Vort or something like that. It's just a big guy with a hammer, you know? Like that's about it. But like with some of the characters, the lore in the game is very telling as to how the character will behave. Do you see kind of what the difference is?
Ludwig's second phase boss transition. Ask anybody what their favorite moment or boss is in Bloodborne, and a huge number will tell you that this is the one I just described. I agree with the initial statement that critic said. Everything that's used to elaborate on the story is a narrative. And Souls games elaborate on their narrative with moments, impactful moments. And those moments are reinforced through gameplay, atmosphere, and themes. Now, of course, Souls games aren't the only ones that try to do this. Ideally, every game wants their disparate
I think Volcano Manor is probably actually one of the best places for lore in Elden Ring, and like how it's told actually through the game in a much more overt way. It's really good.
To synergize with one another. But Souls games, I think, are uniquely successful at it. People become obsessed with Souls lore in a way they simply don't for other games.
Yeah.
I think that's because other games have options when it comes to delivering their narrative or setting the right tone. They can make heavy use of cutscenes or character dialogue. But Souls games don't have very many cutscenes or character dialogue.
No.
They do have
really.
item descriptions. But while item descriptions are a good way to deliver lore, the critic is right. They're not a good way to transmit story elements that are supposed to elicit an emotional response. As a result, Dark Souls and Elden Ring smuggle in their stories through the only other avenues they have available, namely the gameplay and environmental storytelling. And
I do feel like a really badass moment, again, is going up and getting ready to fight Radahn. That is like a cutscene in itself, but you're playing it. So I don't think that you need a cutscene or anything like that. It's just really fucking cool. Yeah, the Radahn Festival was insanely good.
Those, like I've tried to explain so far, do a great job, a fantastic job, of transmitting these moments, of eliciting in the players a specific experience. And by my estimation, these moments, this information transmitted, they are stories. They are narrative. But are they plot? Well, I don't know. It depends on what you consider a plot. I feel like much of this argument really is semantics.
Yeah.
It's people wanting to categorize things in a certain way
lore.
and keep things separate and in different boxes. But personally, at the very least, I feel Elden Ring deserves its nomination. Storytelling like this, that is complex and fragmented, has never gotten the recognition I feel it deserves. I think it's a good thing that Elden Ring has been nominated despite the weirdness of how it structures its narrative, because that means that the broader population, the broader industry, is beginning to recognize that this is a legitimate way to tell a story, a valuable way to tell a story that's just as valid as any other. And that is the end of this video. Please unsubscribe and unclick the bell notification. If you're a Horizon or God of War fan, please leave some aggressive comments in the comment section.
Okay.
If you want some advice as to what those comments should be, I would recommend insulting the intelligence of Souls players. Tell them that they're just pretending to understand the story to feel superior to others.
Yes.
And as for the Elden Ring fans, I would recommend retaliating by saying that the storytelling in God of War and Horizon is formulaic and old-fashioned. Please create an environment so toxic that Miyazaki wants to put it in his next game. And if I haven't alienated you or inspired you to do any of that, then I'm sure I'll get to you in a future video. As always, thank you very much for watching.
I've watched this guy's videos for a while. I feel like, yeah, this is, yeah, what a great outro. Yeah, Poison Swamp. Yeah, the Poison Swamp is the comment section, guys, obviously. This guy's good. Yeah, he's really, really good. And he makes really well put together videos, very thoughtful videos. And they should have nominated it for Best UI. Yeah, that'll be perfect. Brain too small to understand Souls, God of War better. No, I think you can really enjoy and appreciate a God of War story too. I don't think that Souls storytelling is fundamentally superior to other types of storytelling. I also don't think that other types of storytelling is fundamentally superior to Souls storytelling. I think it depends on how it's told. So yeah, the ending made the video. Yeah, it was really good.